So the only talk before lunch is by Ranjini Bandyopadhyay from RRI, and she'll be talking about colloidal phase expansion as a model cluster. Ranjini, 50 minutes, let's go.
Okay, so Shrikant just told you about jammed spheres. I'm going to tell you about disks that are about to jam. Okay, and this is the first experimental talk. We are going to basically take these colloidal disks, which we throw into water. The disks release charges. They form something that resembles a glassy system. We are going to be measuring dynamics, and we are going to see if by measuring dynamics we can say something about the structure of the material also. Okay, so what is a glass? Now, because I work on colloidal glasses, I'm not going to use the IUPAC definition of glasses, which is that the viscosity rises by 13 decades in a few degrees of temperature. I'm going to use something, it's actually the first two lines of this ubiquitous and beautiful paper by Debendetti and Stillinger in Nature, that glasses we treat glasses as just disordered materials that do not have the periodicity of crystals. They are mechanically like solids, but if you could look at it structurally, it is really a liquid. Okay? In the case of the glasses that we were just hearing about, of course, you quench it really, really fast till the time the viscosity diverges. Now, this is some experimental data. So this is.
But then you are using the same.
Unfortunately, I mean, Debendetti and Stillinger liked temperature more than I did. So, yeah, well, I mean, this is beautiful work. It's just that, I think somebody called colloidal glasses digital glasses. So I'm just taking exception to that. But yeah, I mean, these are beautiful experiments. TG, of course, is the glass transition temperature. It will keep coming back. So if you plot the viscosities of many, many different materials versus the inverse of the thermodynamic temperature normalized by the glass transition temperature, you see that the viscosities rise in two rather different ways. So you see this Arrhenius dependence on 1/T here. This is basically followed by certain inorganic molecules. These are the poster boys for what are called strong glasses. Okay, so these are glasses that have, of course, they have I mean, these are activated processes, and in the case of these strong glasses here, the activated processes, the activation energies are not temperature dependent. On the other hand, for several in this temperature range. Thank you. So, and in the case of fragile glasses, such as the ones that we are going to show you today, like colloidal glasses, there are also all these mixtures of organic liquids. As you can see, for these liquids, the approach to the glass transition is much, much faster. People also measure the dynamics. So what you have here is so this is a fragile glass forming material. It's a mixture of two organic liquids. This is a dielectric spectroscopy experiment. So you just calculate a frequency dependent dielectric spectroscopy. You just measure the frequency dependent dielectric data. You fit it to very well accepted functional forms, and you get the relaxation times, or in this case the relaxation frequencies out. And this is what you see. So this is the peak dielectric frequency plotted versus the inverse of the temperature. You see that at the highest temperatures you get just one relaxation rate. Okay, somewhere here, which is in the midst of the supercool region, the frequencies split up into two. Okay, so now you suddenly have this emergence of a longer relaxation time, and this longer relaxation time, it goes to, this is a frequency, so it goes to 0 at a temperature that is the glass transition temperature. I know you have a problem with the extrapolated, yes. So, I totally agree with that.
Beta relaxation here.
Sorry?
How do you calculate beta times, sir?
So this is just dielectric spectra that they've.
There are two humps, right? Clear.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So.
No, but again, in this statement that they bifurcate at some point.
Yeah, so that is where you see a clear two-step decay, right?
You don't get a single hub, whether you should interpret this as a second hub or a different function.
Yeah. I mean, the second hump becomes very clear below in that region, yeah.
Sorry?
What's the
No, no, see, it's basically before the emergence of the caging and cage
relaxation
dynamics,
function,
right?
but it's not an exponential. It's more complex function. Now, if you want in the eyes of the beholder to put another another Gaussian under the curve, that's a choice. But whether you should believe it as two different mechanisms or just a more complex relaxation.
For a frequency space, you do a mini system that is not all.
Well, just a non-trivial sort of wing. Whether you can interpret this as another underlying Gaussian, it's a Gaussian beholder. But that's
We are not really, yeah, okay. Okay.
2001.
Yes, yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's old. So, okay, so here, of course, this is the alpha relaxation process, which is basically the slower relaxation process, slower than the beta relaxation process. The beta relaxation process, of course, in the it corresponds to particles rattling within its cages, and this is basically particles diffusing out of their cages. And this slow relaxation process, the relaxation time for the slow relaxation process, you can define like this. You can fit it to something called a Vogel-Fulcher-Tammann equation. T0 is called the Vogel temperature. It will keep coming back. B is something that's it's a fragility. It's called the fragility. It tells you how rapidly you are approaching your glass transition temperature. For this faster relaxation, okay, it's an Arrhenius process, okay, and it goes like this. And as a result of this kind of, this kind of dynamics, I mean, basically, I mean, you have jammed or frozen dynamics. These happen in disordered systems. These are out of equilibrium, and below the glass transition temperature, you see aging. And of course, you can understand all this in terms of an underlying potential energy landscape. Now, like I told you, I work on colloidal glasses, and there are many reasons why we like colloidal glasses. One of them is that they are actually possible to do experiments with, very difficult for harder glasses. So yes, so that's because it has a wide, colloidal systems have a wide variety of intermolecular interactions. You can tweak these interactions by doing various things like adding salt, adding acid, adding, increasing the temperature, increasing the particle, the concentration of particles, so on. You can also order these systems, something that we are not really interested in this particular talk. You can also rejuvenate your colloidal glasses by applying very small forces that are actually accessible in the laboratory. This is possible for colloidal glasses because of the very soft interactions that the particles share between themselves. And yes, these are much bigger particles. Bigger particles mean slower particles, and therefore you can actually look at them under a microscope in certain cases. You can also measure them in the laboratory by indirect techniques like dynamic light scattering, which is what we'll do. Okay, so this is again, data taken long time ago, but I don't think we've really done much better than this. So this is, okay, no, this is an animation. So, it comes one on top of the other, I'm sorry. This is how Windows people give their talks. I'm sorry, it was not meant to offend. Okay, so these, sorry. I should apologize to the chair. Okay, so these are PMMA particles which are about a micron sized colloidal spheres, and they are packed really, really close together. The concentration is changing, and this is the self-intermediate scattering function. So this is basically a correlation function, and you can see as you increase the volume fraction, so phi is the volume fraction which will again keep appearing over and over again, you can see that the relaxation is getting slower and slower, and that is exactly what we are going to measure in our slightly different colloidal system. You can also do these experiments in different ways. So what you see here, so this is so now the ass has disappeared, I'm happy about that. So here you see the mean square displacement that is plotted versus the time. In both cases, this is confocal microscopy data, this is dynamic light scattering data, and in both cases you see evidence of some kind of caging dynamics. Okay, viscosity measurements. So we do a lot of work in, we do a lot of rheology work. So we'll have to come back to this Angel plot, which was basically the plot of the viscosities versus the inverse of the temperature for strong as well as fragile liquids. And I've already told you about the, so the Vogel-Fulcher-Tammand law. Now for glasses, you see that viscosities do evolve in a very similar manner, except that they don't really evolve. The viscosity, the dynamic range of the viscosity is not quite as large as the dynamic range. This is for colloidal, again, you know, like, I mean, different kinds of colloids. But so what you've done is you're packing them, you know, more and more. So these are all colloidal spheres, and you measure the viscosity, and you can plot it, you can fit it to something called a Doolittle equation. And you can see here, so phi c here is the random closed packing fraction that Shrikant told you about. Experimentally, this number is something like 0.635. So this is basically a blind fit to the data. Phi again is the volume fraction, and you can see that in the case of colloidal particles, increasing the volume fraction is really analogous to decreasing the temperature in a supercooled liquid.
So beyond 5, beyond 0.5, you're going to have all sorts of shear thickening and all of that happening.
Which is why there's only a handful of data where, you know, they've gone beyond 0.5. So, you know, there are obvious problems in colloidal, yeah.
So what is the viscosity that you're measuring? Is it
They've normalized it by something, right? I mean, it's
What type of, how you measure viscosity? Is it a regular measurement? Or
it's a regular measurement in a cuette geometry, yeah. Yeah. These are all done in the linear regime, so these are really, but I totally agree that, you know, I mean, as you're packing things more and more, there'll be extraneous things that come in. So this is really, you know, I mean, except for some of this data here, it's really around 0.5. It's, you know, it's not far beyond, and it's an extrapolation. Yeah. People do take data, and I don't think they take into account things like thixotropy and, yeah.
This is all fine because it depends which shear rate you're probing. If you're only in the large shear rate regime, you will see all the shear thickening.
Yeah. No, so his point is that, you know, you see, no, so I mean, by thixotropy he means, you know, something more, no. He did use shear thickening. So shear thickening is not happening here because it is, it's taken in the linear rheological regime. Now there could be other things that are happening. It's not my data. I just hope that those other things were not happening.
the width of the linear response region keeps shrinking with your increasing.
That is totally true. That is true. I don't know what they've done. That's all I can say. Yeah. No, that's correct. Yeah. Okay. So now, yeah. So this is the material out of which we make our glasses is clay. We don't use natural clay as in, you know, soil, but we use a designer clay which we call laponite, and it is basically a layered mineral that looks like this. So lots of, you know, silicons and magnesium. So you have this octahedrally coordinated silicon that is sandwiching magnesium in between, and what each particle looks like is really a disk. So it's a disk about 25 to 30 nanometers across and 1 nanometer wide, and when you throw this disk in water, it starts releasing sodium ions which form a big charge cloud around the disk, okay, leaving a negatively charged surface of the laponite particle behind. The edge here is not always negative. In fact, in our case, it is very weakly positive because of the protonation of, you know, certain charge groups on the edges. So when you throw many of these particles in water, you will have this collection of randomly oriented disks. But remember that the volume fraction, the excluded volume fraction here is rather tiny because each disk here is surrounded by a large Debye cloud, and these are all positively charged clouds, so they all repel. They don't really want to get too close together. So this is basically a system that ends up being kinetically constrained at very low volume fractions, like 1%. Okay? So you can form a soft glass in suspension. So here's how we make our suspensions. We take powder, we dissolve the powder in water, we shear it, or we stir it very, very hard because there are clusters. You want to be able to dissolve as many of these clusters as possible. So immediately after making the sample, it's about, say, maybe 10 times more viscous than water. You seal the whole container up, make sure that, you know, nothing, nobody is kind of fooling around with it. When you come back later, you're going to find that you can actually, the viscosity has evolved spontaneously. You can actually turn the vial over. The material inside actually supports its own weight. Okay, so it's actually gone spontaneously from a liquid to a solid-like state, and that is exactly what we are going to investigate here. Now, if you, so this is basically a 3 weight percent, so that's like a volume fraction of about 0.15. You take a Laponite suspension, wait for 2 days, and you see a solid-like material here. This does show signatures of glosses. They show signatures of soft glossy rheology. So if you put it in a this is a rheometer geometry. So if you put it in a rheometer geometry and using very, very small strains, if you measure the elastic modulus G prime and the viscous modulus G double prime, you find that the elastic modulus evolves a lot, and this is a spontaneous evolution. Okay. This is at a very low frequency, as low as you can practically get. I keep calling it an aging behavior, but I should say that here the aging is not really the aging that you see in glasses below the glass transition temperature. This is basically the aging that I am seeing here is really an evolution of the dynamics in this particular material because of an evolution of certain physicochemical, the interactions that the particles share among themselves. There are other ways, why you can see that the material is starting to become solid-like. So this is a frequency response measurement. So this is now at a particular data of elastic and viscous moduli taken at a certain very low strain, but over a range of frequencies, and you can see here that the solid-like contribution to the mechanical modulus is far, far larger than the liquid-like contribution. This is when the system is, I think, about maybe a few hours old. Okay, so you can actually see the relative proportions of these two changing. This is the famous yielding curve. So here we've used a very small frequency. We do a step strain measurement. So we increase the strain. You can see that initially the elastic and viscous moduli, they are both pretty much constant. And after this, what you see here is a region of yielding. Okay. So the material is basically beginning to flow, as you can see from here, where the liquid, where the viscous modulus is higher than the elastic modulus. Okay, so why do the mechanical moduli of clay evolve with time? And this is because of a process of exfoliation that I'll just tell you about. So clay, just ordinary clay is basically, like I told you, it's discs and it comes in stacks. Okay, when you put these stacks in water, they start peeling off. So the particles, the individual entities start peeling off. Plus, as the peeling off happens, there is an evolution of the electrostatic interactions, because the more surface area of clay that you expose, the more you have sodium ions coming into the solution, into the medium, and the more you have repulsive interactions in your medium, and things happen. So this is what clay looks like. Okay, in the dry form, it's basically stacks of particles like this. These are called tactoids. Smarajit, everything okay? You're looking worried. Okay. So these are aggregated particle stacks. When you disperse them in water, the aggregated particle stacks start forming single particle stacks. And when you put them in, so you put them in water, there were always sodium ions in the interlayer galleries. So now they start getting hydrated. They apply an osmotic pressure, and it starts prying the tactoid apart. Okay, so the tactoid swells. Swelling of clay is something that industrial chemists do a lot of. It's a very important property. So the clay basically swells, and as soon as, so you have a repulsive interaction between, you have an attractive van der Waals interaction between the particles. When the particles have, when the clay stack has swollen enough that the van der Waals interaction is exceeded by the screened repulsion, you have particles that are basically, they just come out of the stacks one by one. Okay. So we have measured the sodium ion concentration in solution, I'll come back to this later, and they do evolve versus TW, which is the aging time in this case, which is the time since preparation of the sample. So once again, this is it's a spontaneous process. Okay, so we've also made measurements. So this measurement that you see this is done by using ultrasound attenuation. So we basically sense sound, and we looked at how much attenuation happened. You can model the attenuation spectra, and you can come up with a size distribution of the particles. And we do see that at the lower ages, you have big stacks of particles, which eventually with age, that is with increase in this TW, they split up into much smaller particles.
So this earlier sample that we had, in which were these sheets peeling off, and then you have also more sodium ions coming in.
You also have?
more sodium ions coming in.
You have, exactly.
So does which be the dilayer collapse and you will once again get clusters of these particles, or will it stay stable?
You have to wait a little bit. I'll show you some nice pictures. Okay. Okay. So this is the experiment that we do. So this is dynamic light scattering. It's an indirect measurement of relaxation times of the system. How do we do that? So here's our sample here. The sample in this case is of course colloidal clay, which is, it's an aqueous suspension. The particles in the aqueous suspension, they are moving around, they are doing their own thing. So you basically send laser light through it, the light gets scattered. The light from the different particles, the photons from the different particles, they interfere and they give rise to a graininess called a speckle. Now remember, the clay particles or whatever particles inside, they are also moving, so your intensity will also fluctuate. And by looking at how fast or how slow the intensity fluctuates, you can come up with an estimate of the times, the relaxation time of the material. What's a good way of quantifying how fast the fluctuation happens? You calculate an intensity autocorrelation function. And in a perfect world, where things are dilute and monodisperse and like free to go anywhere, you can of course use Stokes-Einstein. You of course you extract a time scale from this decay, and you can use that time scale to find a size of the particle using Stokes-Einstein. In our case, the situation is not as simple, so we'll have to do something else, because remember, we are here looking at a confined system, or at least a system that is approaching confinement, and this is what our rig looks like from the top. This is for the theorists who don't go into the lab often. So what I'm going to show now is data that we've taken at 90 degrees. So you can do a Q dependent measurement here. You can look at different length scales, but I'm going to just show you representative data at 90 degrees, and these are the correlation functions for aging clays. So this direction is the direction in which this is basically older and older samples. So you fill your little vial, you put it in your rig, you send laser, and you just wait for it to spontaneously evolve, and every now and then you are making an intensity autocorrelation. Oh, I'm sorry, this is the intensity, well, this is really the amplitude correlation function, yeah. So, so this is basically the suspensions getting more and more aged. So these are older samples this way, and you can see two things here. One is that you have a two-step relaxation process. The other thing that you see here is that as the age of the system increases, the slow relaxation becomes slower and slower. So we fit it to something like this. So this is basically the fast relaxation bit. It tells you about the dynamics of the particles that are trapped in the cage. The second part, the stretched exponential part, is the alpha relaxation part, which is telling you about how the particles are moving out of their cages.
Do you really need to do a square of that, or?
No, that's because this is different from this. So that was for the intensity autocorrelation function. Sorry about that. So here, of course, I mean, like I told you, it's a kind of a blind fit, except that we've taken certain precautions. So here are our fitting parameters. So this is the fast relaxation time scale tau 1. This is the slow relaxation time scale tau WW. Beta is the stretching exponent, and of course there's a piece A which is telling you the relative fraction of the two relaxation processes. So what I've plotted here versus the age of the sample is the fast and the slow relaxation times, and you can see that they both evolve. So as you're just letting your sample spontaneously do its own thing, you can see that both these time scales, the fast as well as the slow, they both evolve. And I'd like you to have a look at these black lines going through them, which are fits to the data. So what have we done here? So by the way, what we are plotting here is an average alpha relaxation time. So I just showed you this form where the relaxation time for the slow relaxation process, this is the Vogel-Fulcher Tammann form. T0 was the Vogel temperature, D is the fragility parameter, which is telling you how fast you are approaching the glass transition temperature. All we've done to fit our time dependent, yes.
Fast relaxation is actually fitting the early time.
Yes. So that we've made sure. So we've done it in two different pieces. The best you can do is you can see if you're getting similar values of TWW and beta, we do.
Right. When people talk about fast and slow, this
Yes. So
Tau 1 is not the beta relaxation.
yeah, you will, I'm sure you'll argue with that, but here let's just call it a faster relaxation process. See, this is a colloidal glass, things are very different here, I'll tell you, I mean, there are huge differences which will come up later on.
You really see a qualitative difference between the different plots to justify such different fit formulae?
We do.
Really?
We've checked. I know it's a bit of a tricky thing, but then we've checked this.
It seems to me that the tau 1 diverges faster.
For some of the last points. Now I should say that, so unfortunately for us, we are within a region that is far, far from, a supercooled regime.
This
So-
is not something to write home about, right?
Just the last point.
No, the green, blue, and red are very
Yeah, so there is something else going on here. And I promise you that I'm not going to take this very seriously. What we are going to take seriously is the alpha relaxation process. This is over several decades. There's really, so this is an experimental limitation. We can do nothing about it. And I totally agree with you, this is not very convincing. Yes. Sorry? So that is our own nomenclature, I was coming to that. So this is what we've always done for supercooled liquids, right? So all we've done here to get our modified forms is that we've substituted the age of the Laponite suspension with the inverse of the thermodynamic temperature. We've ended up with a form like this, okay? And these are the black lines that you see here. It does well for the slow relaxation time, not so well for the fast relaxation time, but like I said, I'm not going to really go back to that. And you can do something similar with, of course, the Arrhenius bit, which is the fast relaxation time. We've just substituted the 1 over T by the age of the system, and these are the black lines that we get. Yes.
So, as you age, you go from discs to ellipsoids.
The scattering is happening from the discs. Yes.
But if I look at the shape of these particles, they start out as discs, then because of the fact that they have these platelets of negative charge, it's going to be like a divided that looks more like this. So it's becoming more from a disc to an ellipsoid.
Correct.
So if the shape of the colloid is changing with time,
It's not changing that much. See, I'll show you where the shape comes in, and that was why the beta relaxation looked so bad. Okay, so this is that data. No, so his point is that, so first I had stacks that broke up. Yes. No, but yes, correct. So now, to answer your question, so that, that breaking up happens very fast. So the breaking up of these, stacks into individual particles, that happens. So this is where that happens. So here you can see that so this is the fast relaxation time. This is where you are really measuring the, the particles, the fast relaxation process of the particles. Okay, you can see that the fast relaxation process is becoming smaller, and that is because your tactoids are breaking up into smaller entities, and after that you have this, the sodium ions are now out in the solution. Okay, the clouds are repelling, and that's what takes over here. So, this whole tactoid exfoliation business happens only initially. And remember, we are doing dynamic light scattering experiments. We need the correlation function to decay completely. All we can do is we can extrapolate. So really we are looking at regions, which are far, far, far away from your glass transition region.
replacing the waiting time, so it's not clear to me why you want to sort of have a mapping to temperature, but normally that's not how people do it, right? You look at aging systems.
No, they do it. I mean, for instance, people like Barbara Ruzicka, so they did, so they were looking at it in a slightly different context. So they were basically looking at the fragility parameter. So they did a similar plot, and they showed that that parameter changes across the glass transition time.
But if I do a simple thing where I quench the system to a low temperature, and the effective, whatever the physical temperature of the system is aging, it wouldn't simply
I mean, it's, it just works. No, I mean, if you're going to ask me to, you know, I mean, give you a proper justification, it will never be proper. Okay, I can only do half of my talk. I'm sorry, this is a very controversial topic, clearly. Okay, so I'm going to skip this then. And, you know, if you're wondering what happens at different Qs, at different angles, the same thing happens. You get similar fits. And if you're wondering what the two relaxation times are like, they are diffusive. You can superpose the data. So you'll remember that the fitting forms look something like this, right? So here this is the relaxation time at, you know, when you've just made your sample, basically, you know, very fresh samples. This was what we're going to now start calling the Vogel time. This is the fragility parameter. So you just normalize the relaxation times that you've estimated by this number. You divide the waiting time by this Vogel time, and you get this, this is our, you know, the slow relaxation data. It superposes beautifully, as does the beta relaxation or the fast relaxation. Of course, the, you know, the dynamical range in the y-axis, along the y-axis is much more limited. It tells us a little bit about what is happening within the sample. So it tells us that as concentration increases, the structures are being formed inside the sample much, much faster. Okay. I'll have to do a lot of skipping, so I'll also skip this. So just to recap what we saw and to recap what we did. So this is the measurement of our, so this is the measurement of the sodium ion concentrations that are coming out of the particles versus the age of the system. Okay, so fortunately for us, we can do this, you know, even beyond what we are calling the glass transition time, which here is the 100 seconds, which I totally agree is arbitrary and therefore meaningless. However, when we measure time scales, that's far, far away from that. So we decided to do with the 100 seconds. And yeah, sure.
So you said the exfoliation happens really fast, but the sodium ion concentration increases over about 24 hours.
It does. No, yeah.
So are we not still?
So, okay. So, right. So, see, I mean, I should have discussed the part about the ultrasound data. So, what we did see is that, see, as the tactiles, they exfoliate, okay, you have very strong repulsions that are already there in the system that is actually hindering a further process of exfoliation. So, I should say that the chunk of the exfoliation happens right away, but then there's a piece that, you know, that there's a part of the exfoliation process that goes on for a much longer time. Okay, and so these are the time scales that we have measured. This is the viscosity that you can also simultaneously measure as your system ages, and you can see here that, you know, this is not exactly, I mean, this kind of, to us, it indicates the presence of some attractive interactions. I don't know if I can ever get to the data, but so we've calculated the effective activation energies by doing our superposition. You can see that, so this is the activation energy that we've got for our fast relaxation process. Obviously doesn't depend on the age of the sample. This is the apparent activation energy versus the age for the slow relaxation times, and this is how it goes as concentration increases. You can see that the well depths are getting, the wells are getting deeper and deeper here. And basically, the point I'm trying to make here is that the evolution of the potential energy landscape in this case is governed only by the slow relaxation process. So again, this is something that I guess I can presumably skip, except the activation energies that we've calculated from our data. They also superpose very nicely if you scale your data, which basically shows that what you have is a self-similar evolution of the potential energy landscape as the particle ages. The stretching exponent decreases linearly with time, okay, which is something that people have seen in, sorry? All we are saying is that, you know, because the shapes are kind of overlapping, when you scale them properly, you know, the curvatures are probably changing in the same way. Otherwise, why should they evolve in a similar way? So what you have here is this is a mixture of two organic liquids. These were some specific heat and thermal conductivity data that was taken. And here again, so here's the stretching exponent. They used a similar kind of a functional form to fit the data. You find that even in their case, beta goes linearly. It decreases linearly with 1 over temperature. We see something very similar. Here, of course, our parameter is not 1 over 1 over temperature, it is the age of the system. And again, you know, you can obviously you can collapse all the data. We also find, so remember these two time scales that we have, the Vogel time as well as this time scale that quantifies the beta relaxation process and the glass transition temperature, which we used as 100. So this is the time at which the relaxation, the age of the system at which the relaxation time reaches 100 seconds. You can see that these two time scales are very well correlated, which is again something that people have seen in other fragile liquids. So this is again a mixture of two organic liquids. They calculated, this was a dielectric spectroscopy measurement. They got the activation energy for the beta relaxation process out, plotted it versus the glass transition temperature, and they found a similar kind of a linear relationship. And again, there was this paper by Nguy in 98 where he did remark that the beta relaxation time is not too different from the alpha relaxation time at Tg. And then we've done other things which I have 5 minutes, right? I'm going to be really fast. So the other question that we wanted to address was that what happens when you change the interparticle interactions. So we've done this in 3 ways. In the first stage, so we've basically done our dynamic light scattering experiments again. We found the time scales out, but then the time scales here are for different samples. In the first sample that you see here, we've only changed the particle concentration of the Laponite particles, keeping the salt concentration as well as the temperature constant. In this case, we've changed the salt concentration, keeping the particle concentration of the clay and the temperature constant. In this case, we've changed the temperature. Okay? So this is with concentration increasing, salt increasing, temperature increasing, and you can see that increasing the temperature, at least qualitatively, is, you know, looks rather similar to increasing the salt, which is, sorry? This is our exfoliation process. This is our slow the fast relaxation time. You don't see it for the slow relaxation time, which I'll come to later. See, in this case, when you add salt, things happen very fast, right? You know, you're screening the interaction, things happen very fast. You don't really notice that exfoliation process very well. Okay? And here it's much more prominent for the low concentration because the dynamics in the low concentration clay, it's a lot slower than the other samples that we have here. Okay? So again, you can take all this data, you can scale it. So we've used the same functional form for fitting. We are normalizing by, you know, the same coefficients, and so here, I mean, you can see that all our data overlaps nicely. We've also done the same thing. So from the DLS data, we've calculated the slow relaxation data. So here again, with concentration increasing, salt increasing, temperature increasing, again they overlap very nicely. Same for the stretching exponent here. Again, concentration increasing, salt increasing, temperature increasing, works very well. I should mention here that so when we scale the data for the stretching exponent as well as the beta relaxation time, we've used the same scaling for the x-axis. Okay? So now let's see exactly what's going on in the solution. So this is our master plot. So here we've taken the fast relaxation time, the slow relaxation time, and the stretching exponent. We have normalized the data by the shift coefficients for the different concentrations, salts and temperatures, and they overlap very nicely. We've measured sodium ion concentrations. So remember, so you've put in your salt, you've put in your whatever the concentration be, you've increased your temperature. Whatever you do, the net result of all these actions is to increase the number of sodium ions in the solution. In our case, that increase in the sodium ion concentration happens gradually, right? So that is what we measure with a sodium ion meter. Okay? So this is versus the age. This is for our data where the concentration of the Laponite particles were increasing. This is data where the salt is increasing, so you basically just put in some more sodium chloride, you're screening the debye layers around the particles, and you're looking at the number, you're measuring the number of sodium ions in solution. You're doing the same thing when you increase the temperature. So temperature does the same thing. The effect that temperature has, increasing the temperature has on the suspension is it increases the number of sodium ions in the solution. Okay? So that's exactly what we've measured here. Okay? and using all the values that we have from the sodium ion concentration, we can plug all these values into a DLVO model, which is basically accounting for the van der Waals interaction between plates as well as the screen electrostatic repulsion between the plates, okay? And we have made a calculation for the potential between two plates that are approaching each other parallelly. And for that, of course, we needed the Debye length, which we've calculated using our sodium ion concentrations that I showed you earlier. So this is the interparticle potential that we've calculated versus distance of separation. Just two things that I'd like you to notice here. So this is when age increases, okay? So this arrow goes, the arrow going up is basically the age of a particular, so these are samples at a fixed concentration, fixed salt concentration and fixed temperature, but the age is increasing. You see two things, as the age increases, the repulsive peak becomes sharper, okay? Well, the repulsive peak, I should say, becomes stronger, but the breadth actually becomes narrower, okay?
No further exfoliation where you do this. There are no more discs being added to the suspension.
No, yeah, no, so here these are basically different, what you see here, there are, yeah, so these are all for the same number of discs. What is happening here is really happening because of the number of sodium ions that you have in the solution. Because the only external parameter that we've used here is the Debye length, which we calculate from the sodium ion concentration. See, so even exfoliation, we're not worried about exfoliation anymore, because exfoliation increases the sodium ion concentration, yes. Okay, we are measuring the increase of sodium ions in solution, right? Whether it's coming from exfoliation or because of like something else, we're not interested in. We're just going to measure the sodium ion concentrations because we want this value for the Debye length, so that we can plug it into a DLVO model and calculate an interplatelet interaction. We're not interested in the specific details, Okay, so we've done this for all our samples. The age could be increasing, the concentration could be increasing, salt could be increasing, temperature could be increasing. We see that the interplatelet potential goes in the same way, namely that as these parameters increase, the repulsive peak becomes sharp, it becomes stronger, it goes higher, but the width of the potential decreases, okay? And what this seems to indicate is within these very short time ranges over which we can take our data, okay, there might be some influence of attractive interactions. Now I should remind you that this is data taken only over a few hours, okay? It's all an extrapolation. You say that, this hardly looks like it's really narrowing or anything. It's not, I agree. The percentage increase is very small. However, one of my students had left a sample of laponite which was 3 years old. So, you'd expect that, with time, as the sodium ions come out, the particles have time to move if you keep them for a very long time. So you have these weakly positive edges, you have these negative surfaces. They might the positive edges may just attract the repulsive surfaces, right? And this is the data. It's a beautiful gel-like structure that we got for a laponite suspension, the same laponite suspension, but made 3 years ago. Okay, so here you can actually, if you look at it close enough, so this is in a cryogenic scanning electron microscope. This is about 200 nanometers. So if you look at it closely, you can actually see the edges of the particles touching the faces. Okay, now depending on the amount of salt you're putting in, things change. Don't have time for that. He's going to throw me out of the podium now, but okay. So that's the thing. So yes, attractive interactions are eventually very important in these systems.
So that's the end.
That was the punchline.
Okay.
Have you concluded? Then we can go over to the questions.
Yes. Thank you. I'm sorry about the abuse at the beginning of the talk.
No, so
So with this picture in mind,
yeah.
if I look at, you can fully explain and I didn't understand how you got the parameters for a real potential. But you are assuming a geometry
Yes.
probably
it's a huge assumption. I totally agree. No, so the
No, so if I expect that the typical configurations will have edge on
yes, yes,
then parallel
yes. So what else?
is not
That is.
you're extracting parameterization.
No, yes. So what I'll say to that is that attraction will only increase for the other orientations. So this is going to be the most repulsive orientation. If
There's an issue of inference. If you, I mean, the system will do whatever it will do. So if it's not going to have very typically the configurations that you're assuming here in order to extract the parameters, is that meaningful?
so the the debye lengths are changing. The debye lengths are going down, and that is the parameter that we've inputted into our theory. It is true that not all our particles are repulsive, I mean are parallelly oriented, yes. I mean that's the best we can do. Let me just tell you, I mean that's the best I can say, which is that you can only, you can solve DLVO for parallel surfaces and parallel plates. So I mean, if you try to do anything fancier, I mean it's impossible.
In terms of the sodium concentration, which is changing on time scales, that worries Rajesh. I assume you are worried about the fact that on the measurement time scale, isn't there some kind of buffering you can do so that you actually control and fix these ion concentrations?
You can do that. People do stuff in dialysis bags and all that. You can do that. Then you don't see any aging. Nothing.
So the aging is really completely chemical then?
Physico-chemical, yes, totally. Yeah. So basically all you have is a debye layer that is evolving over a long time because of different factors, and that is what we are trying to very indirectly measure.
You can discuss later on.
I am extremely curious to know whether, did you see something called a Nakahara effect?
Which is?
Which is, you take this taconite clays
Okay.
and suppose you do any stress or something, maybe do like that or like that, and then let it dry. The
cracks.
pattern, it seems to remember what you did to it. So since you are seeing aging,
maybe we will. So we've never really looked at the, yes, that would be that's a great idea.
Between this and there are some models for this Nakahara.
No, that's, thank you. Yeah, that is something we can do. So we've been really looking at cracking in a slightly different context. So we have been, can I? Okay. So we have been doing experiments in a Healy-Shaw geometry. So you keep clay in a quasi two-dimensional geometry. You squeeze in something else. Like, so the clay of course is in an aqueous medium, right? You can squeeze in water, you can also squeeze in oil. So, the surface tension changes, right? So in the case of squeezing in water, you do see, some crack propagation patterns. We are actually tracking the tips of the crack propagation patterns. You can see intermittent motion, it's viewed, and we should see memory, so we should try to do this. Nakahara effect, I'll remember. Okay. Yes.
Since we have a discussion meeting, let me discuss.
Yes, please, yeah.
There are a few things that bother me in your presentation. First thing, I guess, is that you assume two types of relaxation mechanisms, one exponential, one stretch exponential. I don't see any reason in the world for this. That is, you have here a rather complex system with particles of different sizes evolving, platelets, this, each population of similar sized particles may have its own exponential decay. Now we know very well that when you take a number of exponential decays, take them together,
You get a
it
stretched.
looks like stretched
Yes.
exponential. And the fact that beta is changing is a very good sign that different analysis
It's
must be
probably,
done here,
yes.
where you really take into account the distributions
Yes. Yes.
of
So,
stuff,
yes.
of things that can happen. And it's a classical example where not following the usual procedures that are done in this subject can reveal much more about what is going on. And I really recommend this?
So no,
It's really
sure,
hard.
of course. See, because one thing, so about the beta relaxation where we used, not beta, the fast relaxation, where we used a simple exponential process. You can fit that to anything, really. Because, as you saw, the dynamic ranges were very limited, As far as the alpha relaxation is concerned, the slow relaxation is concerned, that's, we also, so because this is experimental data, you only have so many points, you want to minimize the number of fitting parameters also.
But
So,
theory, thinking
yes.
about it might be much better.
Yes.
Thinking about a variety of populations. Having all
Yes,
the
that would be
indices,
right.
Estimating
Right.
what is the decay time because of different sizes and this, and trying to see whether
Yes.
without fitting you can get something that looks like
Yes, yes.
whatever. So that's one comment. Sorry. So of course, this is the discussion.
In terms of looking at this question about whether you have a sum of exponentials or not, I believe the evidence is in favor of the relaxation being
Stretched.
complex in the sense of relaxation
In
involving-
such a system, this system is very complex. You have very many populations of very particle sizes here, for sure. Right? This is evolving. You have those sort of small guys, bigger guys, bigger guys, and each one of these populations have different relaxation. You have
That is true, yeah.
translational degrees of freedom. We have rotation degrees of freedom. Each one of those processes
So-
will have its own typical time scale. I think that a superposition of all these.
I mean, I don't know,
Maybe
it's difficult, I don't know where to start right now, but all we've done is we've lumped into everything into an average at the moment, yeah.
Saying
Yeah.
that from the physics point of view and understanding what's going on, it might be useful to think about all the possibilities of different relaxation mechanisms, translational, rotational, chemical, God knows what. And this may give a better understanding. You can always fit and get a number better, and it depends on time. So what? Right? Did you understand what is the physics of this particular system? I doubt. I think that the physics is more rich and very interesting. And I'm just recommending, if somebody has the time and the pleasure.
Yes,
to
that
do
would
so,
be very nice, yeah. That
That's
would
one
be very
comment I
nice.
wanted to make. Another comment, I'm always I'm getting very nervous when people make such strong connections between the glass transition and the jamming problem. I don't know whether your experiment is more close to jamming.
It's closer
than
to jamming,
glass transition.
right.
But the glass transition, what, sorry?
Gelation is what
Yeah,
Right,
this is really,
but one
yes.
has to be careful because the question of existence of singularity, like in Vogel-Fulcher, probably does not exist in the usual glass transition. There's no typical temperature when anything goes to
I agree.
infinity.
I
Jamming
agree.
occurs.
Yes,
So one has
yes.
to be very careful.
So this is really jamming or gelation, like you said, yeah.
Right?
Can't you put a few co-particle in your Laplace
We have done
sample
that.
and look at,
We have done that, and I'm planning to talk to you about it. Yes, I'll talk to you about that, yeah. So we have done that, actually I was hoping to talk to you over lunch about that.
And also the correlation function.
Put some probe particles. So see, fortunately for us, it's actually very easy to plant probe particles because we normally put polystyrene, which are very strong scatterers. So this is an easy experiment. It is something we have done. We have some data. I chose not to speak about it.
It's good.
Yes.
interaction.
Yes. Chandan.
Wondering about the effective interaction that you see. Its strength increases as you wait longer.
The strength of the repulsive part, but you have a very asymmetric debye layer here because it's not a uniformly charged surface. You have negative charges in here, positive, right? Yeah. So you have so probably, I can only speculate. I mean, the debye layer is evolving in such a way that with time, the positive clouds are feeling each other more, but so are the negative charges, so are basically the negatively charged edges with the positive charges, they are also feeling each other more. Right.
Something much simpler than
Right, okay.
in the sense that your inverse aging time is also like temperature.
Yes.
Temperature.
Yes.
So increasing interactions is like reducing temperature.
Yes.
So you can think of it like that, as you were waiting longer, the temperature of course is fixed, but your interaction is increasing in strength. So that is like
So your
interaction strength and reducing temperature.
in our case, when we increase temperature, we also make sure that more ions go into the solution. See, yeah, yes, you could say that. You could say that. You could say that. Yeah, you could say that.
Can you connect this to each other? When you are doing your fix, you are using 1 over wetting time as
Right,
your
right,
temperature.
right.
And then you have another calculation where you have the interaction increasing as your wetting time increases.
Right, right. Yes, yes. I'm guessing you haven't done that.
On that note, let's thank Ranjini again and thank all the speakers for coming. We break for lunch and I think we meet at 13:45.
So the next, so the next one,
Same place lunch.
you are next.
You are the next speaker.
You're next week.
No, yeah. So we have some very nice pictures of crack propagation. So when the surface tension is high, you never get crack propagation.